I always believed some friends are more than just friends. They become your family. That's exactly how I felt about Daniel. We met during college, two dreamers crammed into a corner of a half-broken cafe, talking about building something big someday, something that would make people take notice of our ideas. He was the kind of guy everyone liked, confident, funny, charming in a way that made you forget your worries for a while. And me? I was the thinker, the one who stayed quiet most of the time. But when an idea came, it carried weight, even if it didn't make me popular. From the beginning, we balanced each other perfectly. Daniel had the charisma to sell anything, to make people believe in the impossible, while I had the creativity and the plans to make those dreams real. Together, we envisioned a small creative agency that could grow into something remarkable. We even had a name ready, Visionary Minds. It felt like the universe had aligned just for us. Every late night spent in that cramped cafe, every cup of cheap coffee, every scribbled note on napkins or crumpled paper, it all built the foundation of what we believed would be our empire. When I couldn't afford software or tools, Daniel quietly paid for them. When he struggled with client decks or presentations, I stayed up late to finish them. It was effortless, natural. We supported each other, trusted each other, and in those moments, I felt that this was real friendship, the kind that lasts a lifetime. Or so I thought. Then, 6 months into our little venture, our first big opportunity arrived. A potential investor had seen our concept and loved it. Everything we had worked for could finally take flight. I stayed up 3 nights straight, polishing every detail of the presentation, every slide, every word, making sure it was perfect. Daniel promised he would handle the investor meeting. He told me not to worry, to rest, that this was our moment and that he had it all under control. I smiled, feeling a surge of pride and trust. I believed him completely. I didn't suspect for a second that the very moment I allowed myself to breathe, to relax, would mark the beginning of losing everything I had worked so hard to create. 2 weeks passed, and Daniel went completely silent. No calls, no messages, not even a reply to the texts I sent. At first, I thought maybe he was busy, that things had piled up on him. But something in the pit of my stomach told me otherwise. Then, one morning, my phone buzzed with a LinkedIn notification, and the world as I knew it shattered. Daniel had announced his new company. Its name? Visionary Minds. I froze. My hands trembled slightly as I stared at the screen. My idea, my pitch, my name, everything we had built together, claimed as his own. At first, I tried to convince myself it was a joke, that he had just renamed our agency, or perhaps launched it early without telling me. But as I scrolled, reality hit me like a punch to the chest. There he was, standing proudly beside the investor we had pitched to together, smiling in every photograph, as if he alone had built this empire. The caption beneath read, "Proud to launch my dream startup, Visionary Minds. Grateful for everyone who supported me through this journey." Not a single word about me. Not a single hint that I had ever existed in this story. I tried calling him. Nothing. I sent message after message, each one left unread. When I finally went to his apartment, hoping for some explanation, his roommate casually told me he had moved out a week ago. It was like I had been erased from existence. That was the moment the truth hit me. He hadn't just taken my idea. He had wiped me from my own story, turning my dreams into his claim. The months that followed were unbearable. People whispered behind my back that I was jealous, that I was overreacting. Some even believed Daniel's story, that I was just a helper in his journey, not a co-founder. Every time I opened social media, I saw him everywhere. Interviews, glowing articles, success stories. He became the poster boy for young innovation, while I felt invisible, reduced to a footnote in my own life. But in the quiet, In the emptiness left behind by betrayal, a small voice reminded me, sometimes being forgotten is a blessing, because in that silence, I could plan, and what I planned would make sure he never forgot me again. I didn't want petty revenge. I didn't want to stoop to childish games or shove his face in dirt for the sake of a moment's satisfaction. I wanted something that would matter, something that would make him understand what it feels like to have everything you built crumble because it was built on lies. I wanted him to feel the hollow, to lose the applause that had never been truly earned. So I stayed quiet. I stopped calling other people to explain my side. I stopped posting about our plans or trying to remind anyone that visionary minds had once been ours. Silence became my armor while he filled feeds and stages with his smile. I watched, listened, and collected. Every quiet observation felt like a small victory, proof that I could hold back my anger and use it instead for something sharper and smarter. I started freelancing under a new name, not to hide, but to rebuild without baggage. Small gigs at first, local brands, neighborhood cafes, a startup that needed a logo, and nothing more. I threw myself into the work, letting craftsmanship speak where words would have failed. Word spread slowly. People liked my attention to detail, the way I could make a brand feel honest instead of manufactured. Reputation doesn't grow overnight, but it does grow, and mine did, quietly, steadily. Then fate handed me a door I hadn't expected. A client from New York reached out, saying they were expanding into our region and needed someone to help with branding on the ground. I checked their profile out of curiosity and then smirked at the coincidence. They were in partnership talks with Visionary Minds, the same company that now bore my idea as its crest. For a moment, the old anger flared, but I breathed it out and accepted the project. Not to design for them, not to hand him another polished slide, but to observe. I embedded myself in their process as a consultant under my freelance identity. I read their briefs, sat in meetings, and took part in countless conference calls. Each interaction felt like turning a page in a book that wasn't mine, watching the story of our stolen idea being performed on a stage I'd helped build. The more I listened, the more I saw the cracks. Daniel's charisma had papered over gaps for a while, but underneath there was no structure. Contracts were loose, responsibilities fuzzy, credit given to the loudest voice rather than the work. Worst of all, originality was absent, patterns repeated, designs echoed other studios' portfolios, and phrases from other proposals found new life in his decks with only a different font. It was a sick mirror of what he had done to me. He'd learned to package other people's brilliance as his own and sell the dream while someone else paid the price. I began to document everything. Emails that matched other firms' wording, mock-ups that echoed existing campaigns, client complaints that were quietly resolved behind closed doors. I saved messages, downloaded attachments, made copies of timestamps and versions. I kept records of meetings where ideas were casually lifted and reused without attribution. Each file I stored felt less like revenge and more like justice, being quietly prepared. Collecting proof wasn't satisfying in a loud way. There were no fireworks, no gloating posts. It was tedious, methodical work, the kind that requires patience and restraint. But patience was now my ally. I watched how he handled praise, how investors clung to stories instead of asking for substance. I watched his arrogance grow, with every article calling him a wunderkind, and I watched his defenses thin when real questions were asked. Then the opportunity arrived. Like a quiet knock at the right door, Visionary Minds was invited to pitch for a multi-million-dollar contract with a global corporation, the kind of client that could put a company on the map forever. One presentation, one decision, and everything could change. I had everything I needed to make that moment count. documentation, first-hand knowledge, and the credibility I'd rebuilt on my own. I wasn't rushing to strike. I was waiting for the exact second where truth could do the damage that lies had done to me. The silence before the storm felt deliberate now, not empty, but full of purpose. I reached out to the corporation using my freelancer ID, careful to leave no trace of my real name. I wasn't trying to hide forever, just long enough to get inside. I told them I could help tighten their creative pitch, offered a deck that was lean, honest, and sharp. They asked for a sample. I sent something that felt like me, clear ideas, clean visuals, storytelling that led to action. They liked it, more than liked it. They asked who I was working with. I could have said visionary minds and watched the room applaud another version of the lie. Instead, I answered the truth, plain and simple. Not visionary minds. I'm just a freelancer, but my work speaks for itself. That small sentence opened a new door. They invited me to come on as a consultant to evaluate the proposals from the competing agencies. I accepted. I wanted to be where decisions were made, in the room where Daniel would try to sell the dream he'd taken from me. Walking into that conference room felt surreal. The air smelled like new carpet and nervous confidence. When Daniel walked in, everything tightened. It had been over a year since I'd seen him up close. Our eyes met, and for a split second, his practiced smile faltered. You could see the moment he registered me. A flash of recognition, followed by a flicker of alarm. He tried to mask it with his old charm, the same smile that had opened doors for him before. But it was different now. He knew I was trouble. He tried to treat me like any other consultant, a neutral face in the back row. But the tension between us was heavy and honest. There was no pretending. His team started their presentation, and I watched like someone watching a play where they know every line. Slide after slide rolled by, and my stomach tightened. The style, the transitions, the copy, it all looked familiar because I had made it. Watching my own work performed by someone else felt like seeing a ghost reenact your life. The executives didn't look impressed. Their expressions hardened. The ideas felt recycled, polished only on the surface. I could see the small doubts rise in their faces. The kind that comes when a story doesn't feel true. When it was my turn to present, I didn't speak loud or flashy. I walked to the front with the calm of someone who has nothing to prove and everything to say. I started by telling a story about a brand that had been copied so often it lost its soul. I talked about how originality grows from lived experience, not from borrowing lines and changing a color palette. I explained, in simple words, what real creativity looks like. The messy hours, the wrong turns, the risks that teach you more than any template ever could. I showed them examples of work that felt honest, because the thinking behind it was honest. I talked about how audiences can smell a shortcut, how partners and customers feel the difference between something built with care and something built to sell a story. I used questions, pauses, and small clear examples. I didn't call him out. I didn't need to. What I planted was doubt. I let them sit with it. I showed them what happened when a company leaned on a single loud voice, instead of a system that could stand up to scrutiny. I hinted at the consequences without pointing fingers. The quiet in the room after I finished was heavy. Not angry, but thoughtful. People were thinking, and that thinking was the exact thing Daniel feared. When the corporation later told Visionary Minds they were reconsidering the partnership, I expected him to fight or to spin a story. Instead, he panicked. That night, for the first time since he erased me from our story, his name lit up my phone. The message was short and sharp. We need to talk. I read it and felt my chest loosen. I smiled. Finally, the silence I'd kept had done its work. We met at the same cafe where it all began. The place smelled of burnt coffee and old paper, like the past itself was steeped into the air. He walked in late, of course, as if time still bent around him. He wore expensive clothes that fit better than his morals did, a practiced confidence stitched into every movement, and that same old smirk that had convinced people to sign before they read the fine print. He slid into the seat across from me and didn't bother to hide how dismissive he wanted to be. "Look," he said, voice smooth, "I know you're upset, but this is business. You didn't move fast enough. I did. That's life." It was the kind of line he used when he wanted to make everything seem inevitable, as if the world simply handed him things because he asked loud enough. I didn't reply right away. I let him speak, watched the little gestures, his fake ease, the way his foot tapped under the table when he wasn't sure. Then, slowly, I pushed a folder across the table. It made a soft sound on the wood, like a page turning in a book about someone else's life. He glanced at it like a bored man looking at a menu, then opened it. Inside were screenshots with timestamps, forwarded emails with threads intact, mocked-up designs next to the originals they mirrored, client complaints with signatures and dates. Every document was a mirror, reflecting the same truth. He hadn't built anything from scratch. He'd lifted, patched, and sold. He had taken not only my idea, but dozens of others, and repackaged them as his. For a moment, his face went almost colorless. I could see his composure crack in small, human ways. His jaw tightened. His smile thinned. "You've been spying on me?" he whispered, trying to make the accusation sound foolish. "No," I said quietly, each word measured. "You've been stealing from everyone, and I just took notes." The words landed harder than I expected. He tried to laugh then, a light defensive sound that didn't reach his eyes. It didn't hide the fear. I could see it there, small and undeniable, like a shadow creeping at the edge of bright light. I leaned forward. The cafe hummed around us, cups clinking, a barista calling out an order, but between us the air felt like a courtroom. "I'm giving you 1 week," I said. "Shut down visionary minds, or the world will know what you did." I watched every twitch, every split-second decision cross his face. He sat frozen, as if the room had moved and left him behind. His reaction came as anger first. Rising, hot, performative, he shoved back from the table so hard the chair skidded. "You wouldn't dare," he spat, voice sharp. He reached for the old shield, the bravado that used to work. It trembled. I smiled, not cruel, but steady. "Try me," I said. It was not a threat painted with noise. It was quiet and precise, like the turning of a lock. That week, I did nothing dramatic. I didn't call journalists. I didn't post exposés. I sat very still and watched him start to unravel in the ways a man unprepared for real consequence unravels. He made mistakes that he would have covered before. He sent emails in anger that left chains of proof in their wake. He tried to rally his team with speeches that sounded hollow on recording. Investors who had praised him in glossy interviews began to ask questions they'd previously ignored. Clients who had loved the pitch started to request original work with verifiable ownership. I felt each small collapse like a slow, cold rain. The first call was from a contact I'd made months earlier, an investor saying they'd heard rumors and wanted clarification. Then a client asked for version control documents Daniel couldn't produce. Someone in an industry forum started posting side-by-side comparisons of campaigns that looked suspiciously similar. Each drip fed the next, until patterns formed, and those patterns looked damning. Daniel tried damage control. He called people, sent messages, recorded contrite videos, saying opportunistic things about miscommunication and growing pains. He blamed employees, blamed the speed of scaling, blamed anything but his own choices. But the documents were there, and the more he flailed to spin, the clearer the trail became. Fear turned to anger, anger to frantic calls that came to me in the small hours. He begged, he bargained, he accused. Each plea felt like another proof point. I sat with none of the triumph I had thought I wanted. Watching him panic and stumble was a hollow thing. There was no joy in seeing a person break, but there was a satisfaction in knowing the truth had power, in seeing the scaffolding of lies collapse, because people finally looked closely enough to see the cracks. I let the week pass, every day marking off a quiet victory that didn't need a shout. When it ended, the world around him looked different. The pedestal was wobbling, and he knew it. I, on the other hand, felt the weight of something heavier, leaving my chest, something I hadn't realized I'd carried for so long. Rumors spread faster than I ever expected. Whispers turned into messages, messages into calls, and before long, the network of people who had once admired Daniel's so-called genius began to question everything. The corporation cancelled their deal, citing concerns about originality and ethics. Two of his biggest clients backed out almost immediately, nervous that associating with visionary minds could damage their own reputations. And then, someone. I never needed to send a single file myself. Leaked screenshots of his copied work online, side-by-side comparisons that made it impossible to deny the truth. Daniel tried everything. He issued statements, blaming employees for mistakes he had orchestrated. He cried on camera, talking about miscommunication, about growing pains, about misunderstandings that could have been solved if people had only trusted him. He tried to spin it, to buy time, to salvage a single sliver of credibility. But it was too late. The industry that had once praised him, hailed him as a rising star, now called him a fraud. His team quit. One by one, they walked out of the offices he had built on borrowed ideas. Investors pulled out, contracts were terminated, and within a month, Visionary Minds, the empire he had claimed, was finished. It didn't explode in headlines or dramatic revelations. It crumbled quietly, like a building built on sand, until there was nothing left but dust. I didn't post anything. I didn't gloat. I didn't even respond to the calls and messages from those who wanted to know if I had done it. Because true revenge doesn't need applause, doesn't need recognition. True revenge is patience and truth working quietly, like a shadow that eventually swallows the light. One evening, long after the dust had settled, an email arrived from him. The subject line was simple: "You won. Hope you're happy." I read it, and for a moment, I felt the old anger stir. But it faded quickly. I wasn't happy, not in a celebratory way. What I felt was freedom. Freedom from betrayal. Freedom from the weight of resentment I had been carrying for years. Freedom from the shadow he had cast over my life. The victory wasn't his downfall. It was the peace I had found for myself. The rest, the lies, the empire, the borrowed glory, no longer had any power over me. Months after the storm had passed, I finally felt ready to step forward. I launched my own company, Real Mind Studio. There were no flashy investors, no shortcuts, no promises I couldn't keep, and absolutely no lies. Every client, every project, every design reflected the honesty and hard work I had poured into it. Creativity became my signature, not as a weapon, but as a testament to what real effort and integrity could achieve. At first, clients came slowly. Word of mouth carried more weight than I expected. Each new project felt like a small victory, not over someone else, but over the doubt and anger that had tried to consume me. Slowly, steadily, faithfully, a foundation was built, one rooted in skill, trust, and authenticity. One afternoon, I received an invitation to speak at a youth seminar about entrepreneurship. Standing on that stage, I could feel the memories pressing against me. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the months of silent planning, and the quiet triumph that had followed. I looked out at the young faces eager to learn, ready to absorb wisdom. and I felt the weight of everything I had survived. One of the students raised a hand and asked, "What's your biggest lesson from failure?" I paused, letting the question settle, and then answered truthfully, "Never let betrayal make you bitter. Let it make you wiser." Because I had learned that revenge is not about destroying someone else. It is about rebuilding yourself so completely, so strongly, that those who once tried to break you fade into irrelevance. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it grows quietly, steadfastly, in the life you reclaim for yourself. And in that quiet strength, I finally found peace. Daniel lost everything: his money, his fame, his carefully crafted reputation, and the trust of everyone who had believed in him. And me? I gained something far more valuable: peace. The kind of peace that doesn't need applause, that doesn't demand recognition. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you stood your ground, stayed true to yourself, and let the truth take its course. Sometimes karma doesn't arrive like thunder or lightning, dramatic and loud. Sometimes it arrives quietly, almost imperceptibly, in the steady rhythm of your own work, your own integrity, and your own growth. It's not revenge that carries power. It's the life you build while others crumble under the weight of their lies. The friend who had stolen my idea, the one who thought he had won, believed he had outsmarted the world. But in the end, he only destroyed himself. His empire, built on borrowed brilliance and empty promises, collapsed because lies cannot stand against scrutiny. What I learned, and what I want others to remember, is simple. Anything built on deception will inevitably fall, but anything built on honesty, creativity, and patience endures. Justice doesn't always come with anger or hate. Sometimes it comes quietly, naturally, in the life you create for yourself, while the world watches the truth unfold. Because what's built on lies, no matter how grand, always collapses under the weight of truth.